Did you take women's studies too in college?
No, because I thought that was just for, angry, disenfranchised girls. Like,
You're listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. This is the podcast where I talk to successful women in entertainment and hear their stories. Today I spoke with Carina Chocano. Carina wrote the book called You Play the Girl on Playboy Bunnies, Stepford Wives, train wrecks, and other mixed messages. Carina has written for tons of magazines and was a film critic at the LA Times and Entertainment Weekly and Salon. She is whip smart, and we had a fiery conversation about feminist cultural theory. Hold on to your hats. We went there. We also let the curse words fly in our passionate conversation, so consider yourself warned. You can find us at theother50%.com for added features, photos, show notes, and the merchandise. You can listen on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbay, and now on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Okay, here's my conversation with Carina. Have a listen.
So let's get into this. I initially heard of you because of this book, You Play the Girl, which I've just finished reading and ate up. And so many times I was like, yeah, that's how I feel too. Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, look at it. It's dog-eared like crazy and underlined. And I have all these Post-its and I don't even know if we're going to get to it all. Because really, I just want to talk to you.
Thank you.
So welcome. Thank you for
Thanks.
coming.
I'm really happy to be here.
So just to get a little bit of your background, you started as film critic, journalist. Tell us a little bit your background.
So I started out, when I graduated from college, it was the early 90s, and I was really interested in independent film. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to make independent films. And I really, really admired the Weinsteins.
Yeah, who didn't?
Who didn't, right? Like
they were making good movies.
That was the kind of thing that I hoped to be involved in.
Yeah.
And I went to film school, and I went to a film school that was sort of very do-it-yourself in San Francisco, mm-hmm. and it had a lot of theory also. It was like this strange program that was not so much a feeder into Hollywood, but more like experimental filmmaking and critical theory.
Yeah.
So, and I'd already been
artists.
Yeah. So I'd already been a comparative literature major, so I'd already done a lot of like critical theory as an undergrad. So I did that. I made a couple of like teeny tiny short films that went into festivals and stuff, but I never felt there was really a way in. Even like when I had, my teeny tiny film, I had a film called Samuel Beckett Orders Out, and it cost me $500 to make on film, on 16 millimeter film.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was, I shot 500 rolls of film, for anyone who knows what that means. It was like literally nothing.
Yeah.
And I came down to LA, actually.
Wait, 500 feet of film?
Feet, yeah.
Okay, you said 500 rolls.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That sounds like a lot.
500 feet of film. And maybe it cost me $2,000. I can't remember. Somewhere there was a 500 and it was like very small.
Yeah.
Very,
so you're
very small.
splicing film.
I was literally cutting film on a flatbed. This was like, there were already Avids, but it was just like during the transition into digital, and I just did that. Plus, I realized that when I cut it up, by splicing it, I ended up, this is so ancient, but I ended up not having the negative conformed. I just printed my, whatever it was called, I can't remember. The print that I used to edit, because it was so scratched up and taped together that it looked like found footage. So it was a very
so
cute.
You just used it.
So I used it, yeah. So that was also
an artistic choice.
Yeah, before we could do that in effects easily.
Funny.
Anyway, so, but I did realize that even though, like, I had this, like, funny little film that people liked, like, there was no way in. It was just very
like,
clear.
that wasn't going to get you a job in Hollywood.
Nothing like that would ever. As an artist, like, as someone who wanted to just make things, mm-hmm. I didn't feel that there was any way in. Like, I might have gotten a job as an assistant or something like that, but, like, as a creative person and a woman, it just felt so difficult.
Just impossible.
It really did.
Yeah.
So,
did you take women's studies too in college?
No, because I thought that was just for, angry, disenfranchised girls. Like,
well, it made you an angry, disenfranchised girl.
It felt very like over there, and why would you do it? I mean, I don't think I took a single class, but I do remember feeling like I was a feminist, and I do remember like asking my best friend if she wanted to like start a band, and neither one of us played any instruments.
That sounds like a good idea.
And talking about feminism, and I remember she said, well, I'm not a feminist. And I remember it made me angry. Like, I remember having some incipient, like, anger, and definitely a lot of awareness. And I was kind of, you know, a big mouth. But still, I didn't feel... you know, it was all murky. It was all very murky. Like, what is this resistance in the world? Like, okay, I'm done with college. I know what I want to do.
I can do anything.
I can do anything. And then this invisible wall.
Yeah.
And I felt it everywhere. And then, like, maybe about 9 years later, I had been working in Silicon Valley at this startup game company that was, like, super sexist and weird, but it kind of gave me a leg up into writing. So I was writing for, like, children's interactive media and like really early web stuff, and I thought, okay, well, this is going to be like an entree because, you know, the agencies were sort of opening up to like game writers and stuff, and again, like I sort of felt like I encountered another wall, and I really think it's because I was always on the creative side. I think if I had been on the producing side, it would have been different. Then I started to write television sitcom specs, and I had a lot of friends who worked in TV, and I was like, okay, I think I want a job, and I could do this. I could easily write in the voice of these other shows. I wrote like 7 specs. I thought they were good. I gave them to my friends. They were all guys. They didn't even really read them. Like, and I could see, this sounds very, you know, it's all starting to feel like this sad story, but it's not really. Like, I just feel like I didn't realize before, and it's empowering for me to realize now that I could see that some of my friends who were successful would really like bring up other men, assistants, other friends of theirs. There was a real kind of,
you could see the camaraderie.
You could see the help.
Yeah.
You could see the steps. And with mine, it was like scripts sat in the back of some guy's car for 3 months.
They weren't even trying to help you.
No, there just wasn't. I don't feel that there was ever like, well, if you do this, like, then maybe I could introduce you to this person. Nothing. Right. Never.
You're almost there, kid. You're just lacking a couple skills.
Yeah.
But you got the feeling they never even got around to reading.
That's how I felt. It was like, it didn't
did it feel malicious or just dismissed?
No, it felt dismissive. It felt, and I think that I was really well trained in having this attitude of like, I was embarrassed, you know, because I didn't feel like, I felt like, well, surely if this were blowing anyone's socks off, like, it would continue. So, but I had this weird disconnect.
That's what we do. It must be me.
It must be me. It must suck. But at the same time, what started to happen was I started to write for salon.com because I knew I had friends who worked there. Women, actually.
Yeah.
And they introduced me. You know, they did introduce me to the people who were running it, and they did take my stuff and like go over and show it to them. And it basically started this writing career where I was writing a lot of humor online, you know, these humor pieces and essays and criticism online for them. And then they hired me. And I remember, like, I drove back up to San Francisco with my cat, sad because I really had wanted to write for TV and I didn't want to go back to San Francisco. But
that's where the job was.
That's where the job was. So I took it.
Like, who knew help would be so gendered?
It really did feel gendered to me. And I feel that it always has. Like, for the most part, you know, it's been women. If I look back, it's like the women that I've worked with, like my female network that has gotten me anything. Yeah. And definitely it's almost always a man who kind of gives the go-ahead in the end. And so in journalism, that definitely happened. But the women who brought me in, so the people who brought me into Salon was a woman, a friend of mine. Then I went to Entertainment Weekly. It was a guy. Okay, so he was a colleague at Salon. But then after that, the people who hired me at the LA Times were women. So it's always kind of been that pattern. And
so the Find Your Tribe thing is real. And what
I think it's 100% real. Me too. And so basically this journalism career started to happen despite me, you know, and the other one, it was just, the entertainment career was just like, bang your head against the wall, it's impossible. And I know it's hard for everybody. I mean, it's hard for men too, but I do feel like...
But I've read your writing. You're a writer.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I was always a writer, and I loved doing that when I was doing like in my late 90s spec scripts, like I was making myself laugh as I wrote. Like,
were you doing like Seinfeld? And
I was doing spec script. Yeah. So I remember I wrote a Daria spec, and like one guy was like, "What's that? Why would you?" So
it's a show. It's a thing.
It's a really good show. So anyway, but I mean, that's just to say that I really, if I look back, like to be perfectly honest, like I do think that it's not so easy as for women as saying I want to do this and doing it and trying and pursuing it and doing it well. I mean, there's all these forces that move you out of that lane, and I think in particular for creative women and for artists.
And I think you don't realize when it's happening.
No, because why would it? Besides, like, I don't know how it is for women who are younger than us. I do think that we've gone back in a way. There's forward movement and there's backward movement. Mm-hmm. But I think for us, our generation was very much like, you can do anything.
Well, as you said in your book, and I say, I think in almost every interview, we were raised on free to be you and me. Mm-hmm. So we were put out in the world, you can be anything you want to be. Mm-hmm. And then got out there and went, why is that not happening?
And if you were doing the work and taking the steps, and then it wasn't happening, and you said, well, I feel, because I guess I had this feeling, it was such a strange feeling, that didn't feel like failure. It felt like lack of opportunity, and that they feel different. Do you know what I mean?
One is I did a terrible job, and one is what is this obstacle I can't get
over?
Well,
one is I wrote this thing and it was rejected. Mm-hmm. Someone didn't like it and they told me all the things that were wrong with it. The other was like, well, I've generated kind of 10 examples of what you asked me to generate. I thought it was good. My friends thought it was good. And I know that I'm a writer and I'm getting hired as a writer elsewhere.
But you won't read it?
But it can't, there's no traction. It's like falling through, it's like just sort of falling through the
stick.
Yeah, like it's like not acknowledged. It's not, there's no sense that this is a reality. One guy that I knew at one point who worked on a show told me, oh, well, why don't you just, write a script because they told us we have to hire another girl. And like, I think there was one woman on the show who was a partner with a man.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, like, well, I'm not going to run home and do that.
You don't want to be the token in the room either.
Yeah.
I want to read what you wrote about Free to Be You and Me, because I was just like, oh my God, yeah, that's it. It was the sexism of people raised on Free to Be You and Me, of people brought up to believe that sexism was a thing of the past, so they didn't have to worry about perpetuating it anymore. It's like everyone relaxed, was like, oh, that's over, so now it's not a thing. So then you can't name it as a thing if that's what's happening.
Totally. I mean, to me, that was the 90s. It was the ability to say, we have to hire a girl, girls aren't funny, oh, let's all go to a strip club, and you have to hang with it. It was all the whole ethos of, like, you have to be in the room, and because this is a comedy, it's a free, open space, and so we have to be able to say anything we want, or else, we're being censored. And I think...
So as long as you act like a guy and as long as you behave like a man, you're in. Sexism is over.
But I would even get in a little bit more specific than that because I think there's a lot. It's so hard to talk about this stuff because it is so subtle. And I think one of the things that happens is it's not about acting like a man or talking like a guy or like censoring what people say in the room or even being offended, which is sort of how it's kind of couched a lot. Mm-hmm. It's the fact that like in a lot of these cases, the people who are experiencing disenfranchisement or discrimination are actually being kind of, they're being treated in a hostile way. Like it's not that they're offended because somebody said something, obnoxious. Yeah. It's that they are alone in that room. They are the sort of the sole different person. And what's being said is like, is a sort of hostile action against them. And it's passive aggressive, It's not like they're being berated or called names, but like if you're the only woman in the room, or you're the only black person in a room, or you're the only gay person in the room, and they're like every part of the joke is dehumanizing women or black people or gay people, you are being assaulted, you know?
Right.
Like, that is not just freedom of expression. That's like hate speech, and it's different.
And then if you're not okay with it, then you're a problem.
Right, then you're the problem. So I think there's a lot of like nuance that somehow, is being missed. And I think that's why I don't think it's ever really about, telling people what they can and can't say. It's about having a room where everybody is represented.
Right. So
that it doesn't make sense if you have a room full, that's 50% women, or 51% women, that joke isn't going to have traction. No one's going to laugh.
Right. Or how much traction is that, well, this scene we have to torture and kill this woman to kind of start off the plot. Like,
exactly.
Yeah, how much traction
it's not going to get traction. People are going to be like, no, I don't like that.
Yeah.
And imagine it reversed. If it was like one token guy in the room, the stories would be 100% completely different. And it's not... so it's not about like, the problem is that we still see this white male, cis, het, whatever perspective
as normal,
as universal, and everyone else is the butt of your joke, and if you're including a marginalized person of any kind in your story, that their story is always about their marginalization or about their sort of essential, they become very essentialized, they become very stereotyped. And this is just what like so much of the stories we see are all about. Although now, you're seeing a lot of, thanks to like streaming services and, other kind of, it's not coming down the same pike. It's not all coming down exactly the same pike anymore. And so we're
starting to see some change.
Yeah, and when you do see it, I mean, I think it's remarkable, like, to see, for instance, like, I love this show, Insecure. I don't know if you've seen it.
I had on an actress from Insecure this week.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I love Insecure, but, like, one of the coolest things about that show is that, it's just about this woman, and all the particulars of, of her identity as a person in the world, are sort of different from what you usually see, and yet the show isn't about that. It's just about this person.
It's just about her life.
It's just about a person, and she has a boyfriend, and she doesn't, and she has a job, and then she has friends, and then she goes here, and then her boss is a pain, and her coworkers are annoying. And it's like, people are like, like, before, I think it was really hard to have a woman, especially a black woman, in that role. But we watched Seinfeld. Why did we watch Seinfeld? Why did I watch Seinfeld? I didn't, I wasn't like a white Jewish New Yorker man, whatever.
Well, but you're able to see that as a human.
Right. I just identified with him as a human. And it wasn't even like, he didn't even have a compelling story. I mean, you just watched him.
It was about nothing.
It was about nothing, famously. Like, so it was just funny. It was just enjoyable to see a person reacting to little everyday moments. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what, Insecure is like.
Yeah.
And everybody likes that. It doesn't have to be a white guy. It just doesn't have to be a white guy.
We can relate to other people.
We're human beings, right? Let's relate to other people. Like, I think that the problem with this, centering only a certain kind of guy has done so much harm to our ability to empathize and to see other people as human. Like, it is actually dehumanizing. And that's why it really matters to have diversity in the room. And to, like, not have, all the jokes be about someone's body. Right. Or whatever. Which is still too,
Because it affects the world, and it affects our politics, and it affects how we talk to each other. And
everything.
It affects marginalization of people.
Definitely. I mean, I was thinking about this, a lot today with the school shooting. And this... Obviously, there was this really too soon to know, but there's some, evidence that he was mad at the girl who broke up with him or whatever.
Oh, I hadn't heard that. I had heard his parents had recently died and he had been expelled. Like, we get this whole nuanced story as to why he was in that state.
I didn't see that. I saw some of that, I guess, about the father had died, but that he had been expelled because he was I think stalking a girl.
Oh, is that why he got expelled?
Yeah. There's always like, I'm not sure if that's why he got expelled, but that was part of what I read.
Well, in retrospect, I'm sure there's a million red flags that everybody could have seen.
And I think that, young, like, I don't think it's an accident that, like, young boys are really seem to be indoctrinated in this strange Steve Bannon-esque, idea about patriarchy. And, there's words for, how girls are called, like, on 4chan and stuff, like femoids, very dehumanizing.
Yeah. And there seems to be such a panic about their power being taken away. Or I read something just yesterday that they're envisioning if the power were to flip, that women would use their power against men the way men have used their power against women, and that's what they're afraid of. I can imagine women using their power that way against
Have you
men.
read The Power?
No.
I'm recommending a book now.
Okay.
So I just finished reading this novel by Naomi Alderman called The Power. It's so great. It's amazing. It's like speculative fiction, but it's about a woman who... it's suddenly at some point in history, women start to develop this power, of this kind of electrical power, like eels, but where they can jolt, and so they're like 100 times stronger than men because they can kill you just by, like Elsa.
Yeah.
But unlike Elsa, getting back to my book, unlike Elsa, they don't freak out because they're powerful and run away to the North Mountain to be by themselves.
Be isolated.
To be isolated in a...
And super sexy,
and super
but
sexy,
alone.
But alone. But they actually kind of take over, and then it sort of shows how power in itself, how, when power is completely, like... imbalanced, it is abused. And that's basically the point of the book. And it's really well done, and it's just like, you cannot have one group have all the power over another. It's just not good. So I don't believe in any of this essentializing stuff. I don't believe in like, oh, women are inherently this and men are inherently that. I reject it. And maybe there's truth to it, but I feel like all of like this stuff is cultural.
And a wacky imbalance of power for hundreds of years. And it's funny, I'm trying to theorize, why this moment? Why now has everyone risen up with one voice and it's over? And I wonder if it's because now we've had so many, the Free to Be You and Me people, we've now had so many generations after. And I think you can only tell women for so many generations that you're equal and you can do anything with them meeting the opposite when they get out there before they're like, fuck that.
I believe that. I do believe that. I mean, that was a big impetus for me writing this book. I was like, okay, I was watching Free to Be You and Me or listening to it when I was, 6. And
I believed it.
I believed it. And I also was very aware that anyone who's talked about, you couldn't even say the word patriarchy until 3 or 4 years ago. Like, let's just be honest. Like, you could not say that word. Like, saying that word was just an instant joke on yourself. Like, people would say it like I remember when I first started hearing people say it, I was like, oh my God, it's the unspeakable word. Like, you could not
named it.
Recognize it. You could not name it. And even though we knew the name, it was like a 70s name that belonged to really radical people that we didn't necessarily want to be associated with.
Is it because we thought we weren't in a patriarchy, or...
Yes, it's been denied. I mean, like, it's been
We're
denied.
We're just in the natural order of the world.
I think it's denied. It's been denied, and and a lot of, like, people still deny it. I mean, I remember, so in 2000, I think it was 2012, Jill Soloway made her movie, maybe it was 2011, made this movie, Afternoon Delight, before she made Transparent. And it was about a woman in Silver Lake who's married to a man who has, like, a big job, and they have all this money, and she's just sort of lost in her life. She has this little son, and she has sort of lost her sex drive, and then they go to a strip club one night, and she ends up inviting the stripper to live with them as their kind of nanny / house guest. It's a really great movie. But it's this really interesting story about women being split off into, like, the wife and the sex worker, and, just this kind of, like,
Madonna
splitting.
whore.
Yeah. And there was a review, I can't remember if it was Variety or The Hollywood Reporter, but it was so hostile. And it was so like, and the whole point was like, somehow it whipped itself into a lather of eventually going like, you know, and they blame society instead of looking at them. And it's like, dude, it is society. Like you couldn't really say, you know, I feel like you couldn't name this until really just a couple of years ago. Like I wouldn't even say 5 years ago.
Yeah, when you said 5, I was thinking more like 2.
More like 2, maybe 3 at tops, but time's flying. But you know, but not long. And
because all of our issues are internal, and women are just failing at everything rather than.
I think it was always like you were blaming and whining. Like there's certain code words, you know, whining and blaming.
Shrill.
Yeah, and you were saying like this is just your fault. You're failing. Don't blame your failure on someone else. Don't blame your inability.
You're crazy.
Yeah, or you're crazy, or you're angry, or you're bitter, or you're old.
You chose to keep working after you had a baby.
Exactly. Oh, the choice thing. It's all your choice.
Yeah, let's talk about the mommy wars for a minute.
Oh, yeah.
Because I too think that is total bullshit.
That was nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, the mommy wars drove me insane. Like, because I don't know about you, but like, we were, like, that was hitting us right around the time that
our babies were little. Because I don't hear it so much now, but my youngest is 11, so I'm not in it, and I don't care what they're telling me to do anymore. Right. But at the time when my kids are little, it was just constant. Yeah.
I mean, my only is 9, and I had her late, so when I was in my 30s, which is when maybe I might have been having them in a more, you know, more traditionally might have been having them.
If you had done what you were supposed to do.
If I had followed the rules. Then I would have been like caught in this. And I just remember constantly thinking like, why does nobody actually say what this is saying? Which is, if you want to have children, find someone to support you. And therefore, if you want to have children, choose your partner based on who earns the most. It's like, we've heard so much about this like bullshit evolutionary psychology stuff, like women naturally choose high earners because the cavemen, and I'm like, no, forget, nothing to do with the cavemen. I'm sorry, I reject
not
that.
anymore. Like we were talking earlier, you choose artists because they, you know, are so romantic and they make you feel something, and then you're like, oh shit, you're not earning a living, and I just had a baby. Now what?
But I think that we should be able to choose artists because, I mean, I think you should be able to like, what is, you know, I mean, this is getting into the what is marriage, but like, what is
for love,
marriage?
or is it economic?
I mean, let's just say that I think if we're talking about a society that says women, if they want to have children, because companies don't support us and the government doesn't support us, and somehow the onus of having children is 100% put on women, which
that
I'm
is
also
the question right there.
Really starting to question a lot. Like, why is it only on us?
I think that's the conversation that we've missed, is everyone just accepts the assumption.
Right.
Like, yes, when you are breastfeeding and keeping that baby alive with your body.
That is a short time.
Yeah. And after that, men have no responsibility.
Yeah.
It doesn't affect, their earnings go up. Females' earnings go down.
Yeah.
Regardless of your work output.
Yeah. It's a short time. And, you know, there's many countries where, like, no one even expects that to happen.
It's a blink in your career.
It is a blink in your career, and it could easily be accommodated. Easily. So, really what's happening is that we are telling women that they can either choose love or meaning, period. I mean, it is really coming down to that. You can choose to have a family, or you can choose to have something in your life that you do because
you're a human and
you're
a
human and you need to self-actualize. So that choice is such garbage, and it's so dehumanizing. And to think for 1 second that any man would be asked to make that choice is so ridiculous, and then be judged for either one
or both.
or both.
You're never doing either one well.
Right. And that they would then be told, like, oh, you care about your career, you're going to work long hours, sorry, you can't have children. No, so what are you really saying? Let's just say what they're really saying. What they're really saying is, you're going to basically, this is going to, I don't know if I should say this or not, but like you're basically practically purchasing somebody to be in your house, and she is going to be dependent on you and your income and your ability to do well in your career or not, your ability to like sexually harass someone and get fired or not, or whatever, and or your ability, your desire to want to stay with her or not. you know, you're going to be dependent on whether someone thinks you are someone he wants to stay with, or whether he wants to trade you in for someone else, or later.
That never happens.
That never happens.
About?
Right. Donald Trump never did that.
Never.
Right. So like all these things where these women are put in a very contingent position. Like men are still relating directly to the world, and women are still have to relate through men. And then if you choose not to get married and not to have children, you're definitely judged for that.
Well, you have to discuss it a lot and defend yourself.
Constantly. And it's not seen as a choice. It's seen as a failure.
It's like, oh.
Yeah. So there's really no way. You know, there's no right way in this system. That's why I think this is a systemic problem. And like, yes, like what my choice was, or my desire was to find someone just like me who wanted to do the same exact things that I wanted to, and everything could be split down the middle, so we could both be human beings.
And then how did that go?
It went okay, it had its ups and downs. It's like, but I kind of stand by it. My husband and I have split up and gotten back together. And it's fine, but
it's a constant negotiation.
It is a constant
But tell me
negotiation.
this, when your baby came, did you, for any period of time, accidentally slip into traditional gender roles and then had to reset?
No.
I totally did.
I guess not because I'm so great or anything, but just because I think that the idea that gender roles are inherent is a lie. And I think some of us aren't that great in that. When people are like, you'll know what to do. Did you ever hear this? You'll know what to do when you have a baby. Hello, nobody knows what to do.
My baby came out.
Thing.
I thought I read all the pregnancy books. I could tell you anything about pregnancy. I read 0 baby books. And then I was like, oh, shit.
What do I do now?
Yeah. No
like
idea.
I read books, and I took the baby prep class, and I'm lucky, and my husband came with, and he's very anal and ridiculous, and so there was this funny thing where, like, when the baby's really, really little, you're supposed to make sure they're peeing, but the diapers are so absorbent that when they're like teeny tiny, you can't tell, so you have to like weigh the diaper. It's like this like it's perfectly dry because it absorbed it all. And so I think the doctor told him, but the pediatrician told him, or someone told him, stick a little cotton ball in the diaper because it'll get wet, and then you'll know. It was just to because he was tracking and he was writing it all down.
Actually doing all that.
Oh yeah, he wrote it down, and he kept the chart, and he remembered the feeding times. I'm really bad with, as you've witnessed, because I double booked this very interview. I'm terrible with schedules. I have like a weird problem with spatial stuff or temporal stuff.
Whatever that piece is.
Something. And so things like tracking, logging, feedings and things like that.
I didn't know you had to track all that.
They told us, our pediatrician was a little obsessive, I think. But, so,
it all worked out.
He put the cotton ball in her diaper until she was like 2. And I was like, this diaper is soaking wet. Like, I don't think you need the cotton ball anymore.
She can tell you at that point.
Yeah,
it's
wet.
I peed.
Yeah, she's like, hey,
and I ate
diaper.
too, by the way. I'm hungry.
Yeah. So no, we didn't fall into that. I've always been kind of more work focused. Like I'm always like obsessed with just thinking about writing. Sure, in some ways. I like to cook. He doesn't. He's neater than I am. I wouldn't say they've gone down the middle 100%. Sure, like I ask him to like reach things that are higher, or like open cans, open jars. And
Use
things.
his strength and height.
I do.
The way that God intended.
I will admit to that. I will admit. My brother-in-law was teasing me about the other day because I was trying to open a jar. He's like, "Oh, I thought you were about to ask a man to do it." I was like, "Yeah, but I didn't." But
there are days when I'm like, "Could a man please show up and help me open this jar?
Yeah.
Please."
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about marriage, a little bit more about marriage. Because it does feel to me, and I know my own experience, I think we're in a period of renegotiating because women are becoming breadwinners. And if that, as a man, has been your only conditioning, is I have to go out and support my family so that my wife can stay home and have a baby, and if that's not the case, I think you have to reevaluate kind of what your role is.
But look, it's not even the first time this has happened. I mean, we're 60s,
acting like it is.
We always act like it is, and that's the real problem. Because, like, in the 60s, I mean, wasn't the whole, like, sexual revolution a rebellion against, partly a male rebellion against being the square breadwinner?
Mm-hmm. Well, even before that, World War II, when all the women went to work, until the men came home, and then they had to go back home and get on Valium.
And you know how they even were able to do that?
Tell me.
We had a national network of free daycare.
Oh, yes, I read that in your book.
Yeah, and nobody knows about it. I didn't know about it until I came across it researching my book. And Eleanor Roosevelt, like, played a big part in it. And when they dismantled it, because they dismantled it on purpose so that we wouldn't become communists, it's true. That,
child care equals communism.
Yes, it did. It was considered to be
women would go to work.
Yes, and they didn't want that. Because, in the Soviet Union, women did go to work.
Yeah. But they exposed a big need.
And I can't remember the quote that Eleanor Roosevelt wrote. She was like, "Oh, we saw a need. We saw a need after the war." And and there were all these letters written by women who were, like, husbands didn't come back or came back injured and unable to work, who needed to work, and women who loved working and who had been great at their jobs and who had drunk about it, for husbands, or who just exactly,
like, women have to.
No, it's like
it's survival.
They loved what they did. I mean, a movie like Hidden Figures, it's like, these are the heroes.
It was their jam, man.
It was their jam. They were great. They were fucking geniuses.
Yeah.
Like, why would you put a genius in a house and tell her to, like, mop up after you? It doesn't make any sense. But not just geniuses, like anyone. People who
not to say that women who are at home are not geniuses.
Exactly.
They are.
No, but I mean, but also just like anyone, it's like the autonomy of, like, having your own money. I mean, come on, like, having your own money, having the ability to support yourself, being proud of yourself for, like,
but that's all power.
Anything you do, that, like, in a sort of public way. I'm like Mildred Pierce. I don't know. Like, I'm a good restaurant. What did she do? No,
there's a whole movie about her on HBO.
Yeah, but anyone. Like, that was a movie in the 30s or 40s about this sort of self-made woman. And I can't remember how she started. It was like making pies or selling pies, and then she becomes a kind of a mogul. But the movie is all about how then her daughter sleeps with her second husband, and ruins her life, and she's a disaster. But at the time, she was a kind of that era was an era of, like, women's liberation and empowerment, and the whole, like, 1930s and 40s working woman was a thing. It was beyond just the war.
Yeah.
But that was all dismantled after the war. And it was more of a Cold War ideology thing. It was more of, like, traditional family linked with religion and with traditional gender roles. I mean, it's just your classic fascist trifecta. And it's very ideological.
And we look back at it and think, like, oh, they must have been, what is this gesture? Like,
plotting,
like, oh, let's keep the women in the house. But it's probably not that conscious.
I always thought that it wasn't that conscious, but it turns out there were some people, there were people who really, you had this sort of incipient religious right, and a lot of people who, yes, it was quite conscious. And fairly, pretty deliberate. I mean, the dismantling of those centers, not only were those centers helpful for women and men who didn't mind the women that their wives worked or needed their wives to work or whatever.
It's all family
money. It's also really good for children, obviously, because early childhood education, we know, is really, really, really good for children. And really important, and it really affects your future. So the idea of, like, taking women and children and putting them in these little individual boxes, I'm talking about, like, middle class, like middle-class white women, obviously only, but, like, in these little tiny, isolated units. And these were the women that, even if they'd been educated, ended up in this situation. And it was, I think, that's why you saw the whole, like, Valium and...
Yeah, Mai Tais in the afternoon in the cul-de-sac.
Alcoholism.
Yeah, I think you have to. All right, I have a whole list of more things to talk to you about. Okay, we talked about mommy wars. Okay, Eat, Pray, Love, and The Bachelor. I don't want you to ruin The Bachelor for me because that is still my guilty pleasure. Even though I know everything that's wrong with it and I yell at the TV the whole time, I do kind of love it a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I also did love Eat, Pray, Love. Tell me, because you were not crazy about Eat, Pray, Love.
Well,
You're the only one in the world, by the way.
Right. No, that's not true. Not true. But I think that, like, actually, I'm not talking about disliking stuff, by the way. Like, just to, like, put a finer point on it.
You're analyzing it in the greater context.
I'm analyzing it. So I enjoy the shit out of The Bachelor also,
yeah.
you know? And, of course, Eat, Pray, Love is a fantasy that I can indulge in and enjoy. I'd rather watch or read Eat, Pray, Love than, The Punisher. Obviously, right? Like I
who wouldn't?
Who wouldn't? Like I could put myself in that situation and think, God, that sounds fun, and I would love to do what
we'd all love to take that trip,
right? Of course, what a great trip, and what fun to.
Were you saying that it wasn't the heroine's journey?
No,
or that it was.
I don't remember now, but
well, I have it.
Okay.
We'll post it right here. Let's find it. Oh, can I just say that this sentence? I don't even remember. Oh, Knocked Up. The problem is that the movie would sooner chew off its own arm than explore its premise in any honest way. Mm-hmm. I loved that. I was like, oh my God, I was eating it up. Okay, Free to Be You and Me.
Well, I think that's related even to the Eat, Pray, Love thing. This idea that, like, we're really invested in certain narratives.
Oh, the journey of transformation.
The journey of transformation.
But it was sold before she ever went.
Right. So she had to transform contractually.
Yeah.
First of all, I'd like to say none of this is personal. Like
we love Liz Gilbert.
We love and Judd Apatow and everyone else. Like this isn't really about people, and I think that this is really a major point that I would like to make is that we've lost the ability to have discussions it seems like in this country without them becoming personal, and therefore we never get anywhere.
Well, the whole thing with Katherine Heigl talking about
exactly.
Knocked Up, talking about this sexist premise of the movie, and they all took it as her insulting them.
And it ruined her career.
Right.
So I think, like, it's a huge, huge issue. If you can't talk about a movie being sexist or a book being sort of pandering without it being, like, an insult to Elizabeth Gilbert or Judd Apatow or whoever, then you can't talk about anything. Right. Then you have to just shut up because... well, they're very nice. How could you insult them? You know, but that's not the issue. That's not at all. We need to.
Could we talk about the bigger picture?
We need to talk about the big picture. We need to talk about the narratives. We need to talk about the stories. We need to talk about the framing. People aren't aware that we're operating within a certain frame where certain narratives are taken as reality. Mm-hmm. It's like the Matrix. You've got to step out. You've got to step outside and look at who's telling the story, why are they telling it that way, what are all the reasons, it's been handed down this way, only a certain kind of person is sort of allowed, hired, whatever, green-lighted to keep telling it this way.
They have a particular lens and perspective.
It's a lens that, even if the people that are doing it, if they're not doing it on... like you said, if they're not plotting something, they are. It's just the way things are. People
we don't question it.
Why would they? There's no incentive to question it. And the ones who might see it from another perspective are told, if you question it, you're crazy. If you question it, you're angry. Then it just perpetuates.
Questioning it becomes the injury and the problem.
Mm-hmm, exactly. The question becomes the thing that's been done wrong.
Yeah.
The assault. Instead of the assault.
That happens so
much. It's not the assault, it's that you called it an assault.
Right.
So I think that all of that is so crucial, and it's kind of what my book is really about. It's like, look at the stories and look at the roles they tell us to play and look at how they perpetuate, and we get trapped in these narratives. And we really do get trapped in these narratives. I mean, for a lot of people who aren't a small segment of the population of the sort of power structure, we're trapped, like all of us. One way or another, I think we each have our own little, like, box that we're put in, and so we're separated from each other, and we're encouraged to turn on each other, and we're sort of never really allowed to question the system and the big picture. And I think that that's really the biggest thing that we have to do. And if power weren't distributed so unequally, and if like voice weren't distributed so unequally, like the ability to speak and be heard and be believed. I mean, that's what's been so huge about Me Too and Time's Up. It's to speak, be heard, and be believed. That's the shift that I've never seen before.
Never.
Because when I was like when you were saying before, we grew up in this generation, we had that as children, right? And we saw Mary Tyler Moore on TV and all that. And all kinds of interesting things like that I remember seeing on TV. I mean, Laverne and Shirley was like my favorite show. Yeah. And then it went completely away, and then we had Anita Hill. Then we had like the third wave coming out of Anita Hill, Riot Girls. But what happened there? The same thing. Courtney Love is crazy. All these people of Anita Hill,
just trying to take him down.
Was trying to take him down, a good man down. She's ruining his career. We're still hearing it now. She's ruining his career.
He's fine.
Right. And how dare she accuse him and ruin his career? And I mean, what kind of a justice has he turned out to be? Like, the man doesn't even speak.
Yeah, does he ever say anything?
No. So, I think I saw that in my 20s. And then again, I was seeing it as like a new mother, having just gotten laid off, basically while on maternity leave, with no recourse.
That's always a good move.
Yeah, and then I was like, well, this is my third go around. Like, what is happening? That was what really made me look at the stories. Because, I mean, of course, I've been a critic, and I've been, that's been my job since I was even in college, was just to, like, look at text. And, as a comp lit major, was to, like,
what does this mean?
Yeah, like, take it apart.
Part of the problem is once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Totally.
And then you see it everywhere.
Absolutely.
And I took women's studies in early 90s, and it was 2 issues: state-paid childcare and portrayal of women in media. Just enough to make you furious, but without really any discussion of the larger context. I don't remember at all. It was like we had solved everything except portrayal in the media.
That's it. I don't remember. You might be right. I think that whatever it is, we've definitely done a bad job at looking at like this, at really naming the problem, and looking at how systemic it is, because the narrative the narrative just blankets everything. So we pick out some egregious things, but then you start picking them out, and it's like everything. It's like
it doesn't stop.
Sexual assault, sexual harassment, even like
unconscious gender bias.
Unconscious gender bias, the control of our reproductive rights, gender violence. I mean, violence against women on the screen. I mean, everything. It's everything.
It's
right?
all the criticism about vocal fry for podcasters or women in radio.
Yeah.
I've been noticing lately on LinkedIn, and I'm not trying to get in fights with anybody on LinkedIn, so I'm not commenting. But very often there will be like a super gorgeous woman on LinkedIn who has a very sexy picture. No matter what she writes, there's a bunch of men. Oh my God, you're gorgeous. You're perfect. You're so smart. You're amazing.
That happens on LinkedIn?
Constantly. And then, a bunch of comments coming onto her that are so gendered and sexist and have nothing to do with the content. And there are a couple people that I follow that I could, with clockwork, I know, I see her face, I see what she said, he's going to chime in about how perfect she is. And it makes me bananas. And then I realize as I'm saying that, people could say about me, she's just a sour grapes and la 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 la.
Well, that's, yeah.
But it's so sexist.
It's so sexist. And look, I mean, and this is why I sort of felt like, okay, I started writing this, in my mid-late 40s. I mean, I started thinking about it probably when around 2007, 2008. So it's been a decade, right? But I feel like it takes until you're in your 40s at least to look back and say, oh, look, they'll get you any coming or going. Because, you know, when I was young, like, I had different problems, right?
Yeah.
I had constant street harassment, constant, like, sexual harassment at work, always sort of diminished. I mean, I'm small, I have a little kid voice, right? Like, I
look
look
really
young.
Yeah.
I you know, when I was in my 20s, I looked like a kid.
Yeah.
So all of that has been, you know, and like a cute kid. So like a lot of harassment at work, but like benign harassment,
Sure.
you know?
Just patting you on the head.
Yeah, a lot of patting on the head, a lot of like, so I think that like, you know, growing out of that is a relief, you know, but then you get flipped into the other camp of like, you're just bitter. And it's like, you know what? I never enjoyed street harassment. I never enjoyed my boss making a pass at me. I never enjoyed feeling like, you know, I was hired because I was cute. And I felt that the whole damn time. Yeah.
But then the opposite is
The opposite of that is exactly.
and unfuckable.
Exactly.
So then you're crazy.
Right. So honestly, the idea, I kind of don't understand women. I mean, maybe it's just like perspective, and obviously the culture keeps us from really accepting this and really looking at this. I mean, we're taught, this was sort of the fairy tale narrative, you know, we're taught from such a young age that the heroine is the prettiest and that the prince will fall in love with her at first sight and she'll be protected by the patriarchy in the king's castle. And the witch is trying to kill her. The stepmother's trying to kill her because she's old and powerful.
Her mother's dead.
Yeah, her mother's dead, but the evil person is this woman who is single and angry that the young girl is prettier,
Old, ugly.
you know, like who's the fairest of them all. So she's going to annihilate you, and you better not be that person. But the thing is, what's the alternative? The alternative is disappear into the castle and never be heard from again. I mean, look at the arc of the traditional girl's story. It's like it ends in marriage or it ends in tragedy. So, but the marriage, you know, is happening like traditionally. I mean, I wrote about this in the book. Is like the character of the ingenue was sort of her only adventure. The only permissible adventure is the journey to marriage, and we've been seeing that until like really last week, practically. Like with all like all the chick flicks of like the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah,
the so-called chick flicks.
The story's over after the wedding.
It's always a story about will she marry the guy, and then she's done. And like if you think about traditionally what age that person is. She's a child. I mean, she's been an adult for 5 minutes.
It's before 30 for sure.
Oh, for sure. Like, it's like you leave your father's house. I mean, this is the story, the fairy tale story. It's like the perilous journey from the father's house to the husband's house. So it's happening, obviously, really young. And then that's the end of the story. Then you never hear from her again. Then the only women that you see are evil bitches like, you know, Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada. You know, whose husband actually hates her because she's
everybody
so
hates
bossy.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like...
Because she's so bossy.
She's bossy. She's the boss, and nobody likes the boss when she's a woman.
Because she's so horrible.
Yeah. So, I think that's, you know, that story, it sinks in, and I think...
We get the message.
We do get the message, and when we're young, like, come on, like, you can't expect every girl to be able to be so... critically like self you know possessed to like be able to fend off these messages. I think that now things are changing because we're able to talk about it on social media, and so people are sharing their stories and they're coming together and going, yeah, fuck that. But you know, we didn't have as much of that ability to connect.
We didn't have the internet. We are just that old. So what I wanted to ask your thoughts on, now that we know all of this and we see all of this and you can't unsee it and you see it everywhere you look, what do we do now?
You know, I wrote this book like sort of trying to just put down my observations, and because I think that we do, you know, the first step was naming things, and I'm amazed that like, you know, like 3 months after it came out, suddenly like the floodgates opened, unrelated to my book obviously, but like the, you know, Harvey Weinstein and all of the Me Too and Time's Up and everything. And so that has accelerated more than I ever thought. The sort of,
Yeah.
again, the speaking, being heard, and being believed has gone from,
From zero to
in a very short time. And I think that now a lot of what's happening that I want to be more involved in and find out more about, but I don't know exactly the scope of it. But like, I think that the Time's Up movement, a big part of it is sort of taking legal action, is sort of having, certain systemic and legal protocols and policies in place so that we stop kind of shoving this under the rug and blaming individual women for failing to take on, 5,000 years of history and all the power in the world.
Yeah.
But
this is systemic change that needs to be made.
And I believe it can be made, and I think it's crazy. I really never, ever want to hear another discussion about how men are like this and women are like that, and it's garbage. Like, it's, we are in a massive imbalance of power. If we had a balance of power where every human being really was equal and free, then maybe we could talk about, whether we have intrinsic different ways of being in the culture, in this world, But
to tell it's a level playing field, you really don't know.
I mean,
today there was a big sexual harassment kerfluffle about a female congressperson because of her power. So
I haven't read it, but I think the issue is power imbalance. I think that is such a huge elephant in the room that it really becomes hard to talk about biology or whatever. It feels essentialist to me, and I just don't see what I don't see what good comes of that, honestly. It's like, Charlotte Perkins Gilman was this pioneering feminist in the 1900s, and she wrote this amazing book. It was like a tract, and it was like a huge best-selling pamphlet called Women in Economics. She was an economist, and she wrote about how, and it was even obviously much worse at the time, where women were just not able, unless they, women like her anyway, like educated white women couldn't have any kind of employment. So we're 100% dependent on husbands and fathers, unless they did, there were just a few things. But
or they could do something acceptable.
There weren't many things, You could be a writer, which is sort of what Virginia Woolf wrote about that. You could be a writer, you could maybe be a governess. There wasn't a whole lot else. But she wrote this book, Women in Economics, and my favorite line from that is, it was something like, humans are the only species where the female is dependent on the male for food.
Yeah.
And that, to me, kind of cuts off that nature argument right there. You know what I mean? It's not nature, it's culture.
It's totally culture.
Yeah.
And for so long, if a woman working would actually make her husband look bad, it's absurd.
Yeah, it was absurd. It was actually, yes, it would make her, I think that my mom, for instance, was in a generation where, my dad was an executive, at a pharmaceutical company. Wives didn't work.
Yeah.
And I think
and she probably had to do a lot to support his career and support him up the ladder.
We moved constantly.
Yeah.
So it was one of the things that was difficult was even sort of maintaining some kind of a foothold in, she couldn't have gone and been a lawyer or something because we would have moved 2 years later to another country, So,
and for him to be that kind of executive, you have to have a wife at home taking care of hearth and home.
You absolutely have to, because you couldn't be him and be single. That's not acceptable.
Right.
He needs the wife and kids.
And
he needs the picture on the desk. And this is still
happening.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is why it's so much harder for women to get those executive ranks, because they probably don't have a husband at home taking care of everything.
Absolutely. And in fact, it's funny, because I was recently talking to a friend who's a man, and he's a writer, but he's like, that does not reflect my experience. I was like, you don't know then, I think you go into any sort of executive level, C-suite level, and it's you've got the photograph of your wife and children on the desk, And that is part of your job. And so someone has to support that. And that actually involves
and it's not
quite
just
a
that.
bit of work.
You have to be available at night and on weekends and to go to executive retreats
You're
and to wine and
travel
dine
all the time.
clients.
My dad
and
used to travel, earlier days in his career, 6 months out of the year. Yeah. He was, based in New York, but like in charge of Latin America. He was always gone. So, and my mother was in, like my Stepford Wives chapter. She was freaking out, in like this very quiet suburb of New York City, by herself, like with kids at school or the baby, and losing her marbles, like seriously losing her mind. So that's a weird setup, and I don't know, as we know, like kids grow up pretty fast, but
so fast.
It's very fast, and yet if you're really going to have to be there around the clock and only do that, it's also a long time in terms of your career.
The days are long, the years are short.
Yeah, so what are we doing with all these women, who are then finding themselves, again, like dependent on a husband, and if he loses a job or dies or leaves her or she leaves him or whatever, like this setup is really problematic.
There's something wrong with the setup. And work also, the workplace that was made by men for men. Mm-hmm. And we're all screaming about it needs to be half women, which will change the culture.
Of course.
And it's going to change all of the culture.
It would change the culture. And that's really what's so important about it. There's no reason why work culture can't be more accommodating.
Which will be better for men, too.
It'll be better for everybody.
Yeah.
It'll be better for children, it'll be better for men, It's better for everybody. I mean, that's why I think like that's the thing that we don't name and we don't look at, that this system is very, it's a patriarchal system. It's really like rooted in some really ancient, like hardcore, ways of thinking.
Yeah. But I do see it in millennials in that they are insisting on more work-life balance, and they are a bit more egalitarian with their spouses and their partnerships and how they think families should be set up.
I feel like we did that too. I mean, I'm all for it, and that's great, and I support anyone who feels that way. But I always feel like we should be careful not to say it's different now. Because I feel
systemically,
like
it still hasn't changed.
When we were young, we talked about the same stuff. What happens is,
right.
There's a famous Harvard Business School study that was done. They interviewed women, I think our age, when they started out, and then 10 or 20 years later.
When they're leaving, and they say, oh, it's because of childcare, and it's actually no.
And also, they weren't promoted. They didn't earn as much.
They're tired of beating their head against the wall.
And the husbands, meanwhile, are moving forward. And so then there's that sense, this phrase that everybody uses, it just made sense.
Yeah.
Why? It just like as if it just happened by magic. And it's like, no, we've been beating our heads against the wall and giving up.
We're exhausted.
That's been happening really for longer than I think even you and I are aware of. That's been happening forever.
Yeah.
Like,
and we're barely talking about that now. But I'll tell you, I know so many women right now who have left corporations and are in mid-career transitions that I just started a club. Mm-hmm. And literally, we're going to have our first meeting next week. Because there are so many.
Oh, there's so many. And I think it's so complicated because, again, like that's where the power is. That's where the money is. It's like, I know that we all go and do our own thing. I mean, I did it at 40, A lot of us.
I'm doing it right now.
You're doing it right now. My sister did it. People just. But my sister started her own digital marketing and web development agency.
Cool.
And she's done really well. Mm-hmm. And her husband, who lost a job around that time, decided to support that business. And so he's more at home than she is. And he was always kind of the more mindful parent, honestly. Like, not to, just like in my marriage, he's just, I don't know, he's better at it. He's also an artist, so he has time to do his art, and he's like an athlete, so he has time to ride his bike, and then he does the books, and he does a lot of the financial stuff that she doesn't do, but she's working constantly and traveling.
And how wonderful he can have that opportunity to explore that side of himself as
well.
Right,
like he's
feminism helps everyone.
It helps everyone. I mean, he went from a managerial job that he hated to making art and riding his bike and taking care of his kids and helping the business grow.
Yeah.
And he's got an extremely balanced life where everything about their business is for their family and for, and it doesn't like slice everybody off into their own silo.
And is she super fulfilling her thing and making it happen?
I mean, she's fulfilling her dream. I mean, it's amazing. Like, I'm honestly, I'm bragging about it because I can't believe it. But when I go and I see, like they just bought a building and it was like this beautiful old Texaco station, and then they refurbished it. He did all of the interior design. Like, he kind of refurbished this cool old building, and they're growing and growing, and it's amazing. Like, I think that collaborative marriages are really where it's at, I have to say. I mean, as long as we put so much onus on marriage in this system, like we really do. This is what Charlotte Perkins Gilman wrote about. Like, we treat families as units, so it's a little bit, I think we have to look at it.
Collaborative marriage. Because
if all of the work and the power and stuff goes through the husband, it leaves women and children in a very vulnerable position. And corporations still use that old idea to justify paying men more.
Yeah.
It's a family wage, and a woman's wage is never considered a family wage.
Except now I know so many women who are the breadwinners.
Of course. But they're still making less, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. It's very antiquated. All right, so smash the patriarchy. Is that our takeaway?
Burn it down.
What are our next steps?
Next steps, I think we talk about. I think really the main thing is equalizing power structures. Like, we have a problem. I would see this thing. I would see articles in the New York Times all the time, like, tech has a woman problem, Hollywood has a woman problem, Wall Street has a woman problem, government has a woman problem.
Fix it, women.
Science has a woman problem. Like, it was always like, there aren't any women in tech, there aren't any women in science, there aren't any women on Wall Street, there aren't any women in the government.
If you isolate it to one industry, you're missing the entire point.
And I would see these things one after another, and I'd be like, connect the dots, please. Connect the dots. Like, women in the workplace is meaningless when you see that in all the sort of echelons of power and everywhere where money is made, they're not there.
And even that phrase, women in the workplace.
Yeah.
It's like unicorn in the forest.
Yeah. Like, look at, what is this odd thing
It's a woman in the workplace.
Let me sniff it.
What's she doing there?
Yeah.
That's odd.
Yeah. So I think that's the thing. We need to have, work that reflects society, because that is, we can't continue to do this Victorian thing of splitting off men in the public sphere and women in the domestic sphere. Like, that's...
Well, there's not a lot of evidence that they made it a utopia.
No, quite the opposite. Quite the opposite.
So, time's up.
Time's up, for sure.
Would you say the title of your book, please? I don't even think we said it.
You Play the Girl, and it comes from a quote. The actress Isla Fisher was interviewed by her hometown paper in Australia, I think, or an Australian paper, after she made The Wedding Crashers, and they asked her, like, oh, you must have gotten, your pick of parts. And she said, well, I thought I would, after The Wedding Crashers, because she stole the show. And she said, I thought I would, but then I realized that, and at first I felt really bad that they weren't coming my way, but then I realized that in Hollywood, all the roles are written for men and you play the girl. So it didn't matter how good she was in The Wedding Crashers and how she stole the show and how everyone said so. There was just nothing for her to be in.
There's just no parts. I'll tell you that Sujata Day was in here the other day, and she's the one who's on Insecure. She said she's going out this pilot season, and she can't believe the number of juicy, complex roles for women and people of color.
Well, I
she's
would
really
say
optimistic.
I am very optimistic. I think that the fact that we have sort of come together. First of all, I think coming together is so important, and I really, one thing that I do wish is that, like, we're okay also with having a broader category of just women, because we split off too much generationally sometimes, and like,
so intersectionality,
but in a together way, kind of like all of our we all face all kinds of problems based on all kinds of issues, whether it's looks, weight, class, race, sexual orientation, all of it. But I believe that there is a category of women where we do have like some of these basic things in common. We don't escape them, no matter what other...
There may be varying degrees of things.
Varying degrees, and various different things happen during, our concerns at different points in life, at different socioeconomic levels and all sorts of differences. But we still have this in common, and I think that we should kind of celebrate that solidarity and like come together as much as possible, because we need to, because it's a big fight and the power is really entrenched, and
we are the majority.
We are the majority, and they benefit from us being divided. So I think that's important. And also, but I do think that having been, this idea of people having come together and listened to each other and then having been heard, and it has made a big difference, and there does seem to be a real shift, at least in storytelling, where we are seeing stories. Because really what matters is, it's not about, it's not about representing categories. It's not about, being a category prototype. But also, we need to, speak for our own experience. You know what I mean? You don't have to speak for every woman. I don't have to speak for every woman. I think the idea is, if I can speak for myself, some people will relate. And then the person next to me speaks for herself, and people will relate. And we should all learn to I think that's what brings us together, to
let everybody speak.
Let everybody speak. I mean, that is really my main thing. Let everybody speak. Because everybody is a human being with an individual perspective and with a historical setting and all kinds of forces that shape you. And we benefit when we let everybody speak. Everybody, So it can't just be this group here and then the token person who's supposed to speak for everybody.
Right. Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
You've been listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. I'd like to thank Carina Chocano for sharing her story. And go pick up her book, You Play the Girl. And special thanks to Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Allison McQuaid for the music. Please find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or Podbay, and subscribe and leave a review. And of course on our website, theother50%.com, all spelled out, for added features, bios of our guests, and the merch. Please go there right now and subscribe. You can also follow us on Facebook and on Twitter at Other50%, and Instagram at Other50% Podcast. Thanks for listening. See you next time.